All right, we have a chance today sitting down with Grant Leeth. Grant is doing something that a lot of you are doing, and that is in a startup, in a world where you have to get a lot of support, you have to get a lot of visionaries, you have to get people around you to accomplish the dream you have. Most of the work to do that isn't the core work of what you're great at.
Yep.
Someone who's a great technician at a thing, I work with a lot of tech startups and other folks who they're really good at that thing, and now to get it going, they have to go out into the business world, into a kind of uncomfortable environment, to get a business launched, to get the funding to do it.
Yep.
And there's a catch-22 between what you have to do, what you want to do. You're starting up the attempt to be the start of the first Division I wrestling program in the state of Texas.
Yep.
Correct?
Yes, sir.
So I asked to have this conversation because I think, one, big fan of wrestling. That's what we have in common. You know, both wrestled, high school, college, all of that. Have been around some really great guys, and we'll probably end up talking about wrestling because that's what we do.
Hope so.
But also, you know, athletically in the United States, the state of Texas is one of the, largest talent pools.
Yep. Fourth.
Fourth?
Yep.
And the amount of athletes in this state, mostly football,
Yep.
is incredible. When we moved down here, I was just shocked that they didn't have the type of wrestling programs in the lower ages, and realized there's no school to feed into. But what you're doing is pretty courageous. You know, going into a place where you're not from, there's an opportunity. So I want to hear all about that. But today, really just wanted to get a background. We're here sitting in Austin, Texas, and you drove down to have the conversation. I appreciate that. I look forward to just learning, about what is it that got you to this point in your life to have the courage to do it. I appreciate you being here.
Oh, absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity to get to speak on a little bit about our program and what we're doing. And the opportunity to bring Division I to Texas it was something that could not pass up.
It has to be. What does that mean? So how does a school, or the school, make the decision to do this? Was there someone behind it? Like, who makes the decision that we really want a new sport in our school? We're going to introduce it. Who makes that decision?
So how it all started, specifically at Tarleton State, was there was a group. It's the Texas Collegiate Wrestling Foundation. Mm-hmm. They're a nonprofit 501(c) that is focused on bringing more wrestling programs at the collegiate level to Texas, more specifically a Division I program. When you add a Division I program to the state, the whole level of wrestling rises. As we graduate kids, they'll go into the workforce, hopefully in Texas, and give back to the wrestling community within Texas, and you'll see a rise in the talent level
for sure
within the whole state.
It's fascinating that sometimes people think, well, it's going to be the big school in the state that starts, UT or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that group then must have had an initial passion. You could probably trace it back to one person or to a few people. Do you know the story?
Yes. So in May, this was before I even knew about Tarleton State, before I was involved, the Texas Collegiate Wrestling Foundation hosted a kind of gala fundraising event to bring Division I wrestling. And they were approached by the vice president of Tarleton State, Tony. He had wrestled in Ohio, so was familiar with the sport. Ohio is one of the best wrestling states in the country. So he understood the sport, understood what it could do for students, college students specifically, and with Tarleton transitioning from Division II athletics to Division I, he saw an opportunity to add the sport of wrestling for both men and women. So he approached our organization, said, hey, we're willing to do this. We want to be the first one in Texas. That being said, we need $2 million, and we need you to start this team as a club team, build it up, and then we can potentially transition. So
that's fascinating. So first of all, the power of a vision is pretty important,
Yep.
but also timing for opportunity, right? So other things were happening. School's going from D2 to D1. There's a moment in time. There's a window of opportunity.
Yep.
And I think most people who are trying to do something, they want that. They look for the opening.
Yeah.
Guy like wrestling, you look for the opening, you take the shot.
Big time.
Or in football, you're running for the hole. So that timing, he obviously saw this would be the time.
Yep.
Capitalize on other external factors.
Yep.
What else do you think is really driving the state itself? I've been here 3 years, and from Illinois, which is a good wrestling state, And I was surprised at as you were, like it wasn't at the level that some other states have,
Yep.
but it's rising quickly.
Yep.
We have Olympic gold medalist, from Texas, men's stock. And, she really,
Brandon
I think, personified, what's that?
Brandon Slay.
Brandon Slay.
Yeah.
Bo Nickel from here, but
Bo Nickel.
I mean,
Yeah.
so, and
Yeah.
Bo's, so people I don't think trace it back, but even recently, I think like women's wrestling is probably the fastest growing high school sport in the country.
Yep.
Those things coming together.
Mm-hmm.
We need more football programs to understand the benefit of wrestling.
Big time.
But with all of that, so where were you when this opportunity came to you? What were you doing?
Oh man, I got a good story for this. I was coaching at Stanford. I'd been there the last 2.5 years under Rob Cole. For those of you that don't know, Rob Cole changed the fundraising and entrepreneurial aspect of coaching within the wrestling community. He started at Cornell before it was even a thought that Ivy Leagues could compete with the Big Ten, with the Big 12, and brought several team trophies, had now 2 4-time national champs out of 6 to Cornell. He took over that Stanford program after they'd cut it. I came in with him, and our first 2.5 seasons, we had the number 5 recruiting class in the country, number 3 recruiting class in the country, and the number 2 recruiting class in the country.
Yeah.
So we had built this team that was ready to break ground and do something that had never been done at Stanford. Yeah. And going into this past season, he got the opportunity to take his dream job at UNC. Mm-hmm. It's his alma mater. He was a national champ there. It was home for him. So obviously, very happy for him, but also saw the writing on the wall. Like,
I mean, for you,
my future is potentially coming to an end here. They brought in a new coach. I'll save all the extra details, but they brought a new coach, and his first day in fired me. And
going to bring his own crew in, right?
Absolutely.
Sure.
It's part of the game. As heartbreaking as it was, I loved those kids, loved the program, was excited to see it finally come to fruition. But it also opened the door for this opportunity. I had met Jim Junta, who's the president of the NCAA, National Collegiate Wrestling Association. They do all the club sports. So like University of Texas, Texas Tech, Texas A&M, they have teams that participate in the NCAA. We met at the National Wrestling Coaches Association. It's a little confusing. You've got the NCAA, you've got the NCAA, and then you've got the NWCA.
Which none of them have anything to do with USA Wrestling.
No. They're all wrestling, to an extent. Yeah. But he approached me with this opportunity, said, hey, we want to add Division I wrestling to Texas. Rob endorsed you to do this. Is this something you want to do? I initially turned it down.
Why?
I wanted to stay at Stanford. I loved what we were doing. Yeah. Again, had relationships with those kids and wanted to see all those recruiting classes and the momentum we had built, the fruits of our labor. But then I got fired and was like, hey, Jim.
Yeah. But isn't it interesting because you mentioned disappointing getting fired and yet look at the door that's opened.
Oh.
I mean, it's easy to see doors close. It's harder to see that they open.
Absolutely. And it was the push I needed because, again, I didn't make this decision on my own.
Yeah.
And without being fired, I might not have. But since then, it's been the best thing that ever happened to me. I've learned and met so many incredible people. The way we were met here in Texas with just open arms and such excitement was so cool to see. And now meeting these kids we're recruiting and these coaches in Texas that are passionate about growing the sport here, it's been a really cool thing to be a part of.
Yeah, well, I think you've done, we'll get into that in a little bit, but when we first met, the thing that I noticed is you've got the smoke of battle on you. And when someone's in the hunt and someone's trying to make something happen, you can tell.
Yeah.
There are people just mailing it in. Yeah. And they don't have that same thing. But I want to rewind back to, you had mentioned, I just read an article actually by a guy named James Raybould. Raybould, I'm plugging your article. But he mentioned that one of the most important things in doing is not just choosing, an industry or a company, but it's also choosing your boss, your manager, who you learn from.
Yeah.
And what you had mentioned at Stanford, from the outside watching that was really impressive because I grew up in the era, like you mentioned, where Ivy League wasn't a thing in wrestling.
Yeah.
This was 100 years ago. The world was flat. You know,
Yep.
Dirt was new. We were excited about it. But so it was Big 12 wrestling then.
Yep. Okay.
And Big 10. So you had essentially the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
And this was Iowa, Dan Gable era for a decade.
Yep.
A couple decades. Still great. And then you saw what could happen. Kale went to Penn State. So what could happen there. And then pretty soon you started seeing a whole different way of building. Cornell was a breakthrough that like no one saw coming.
Yeah, big time.
He built such an impressive team. And I would argue even before Penn State, where intellect was as valuable as grit.
Yep. Oh, absolutely.
And that changes things so much.
It changed. It is still changing.
Yeah.
The way people approach the sport. Big time.
There was a time, and this was, 2 decades ago, it was about being rugged and tough, and it doesn't matter how many bones are broken.
Yep.
I mean, and even still today, you have Spencer Lee, who wins an NCAA's national championship with 2 torn ACLs.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yep.
But then also, so Stanford got really interesting for us, again, being associated with the wrestling world.
Yeah.
And as it became more and more easy to transfer schools,
mm-hmm.
that changes the way recruiting is done, right? There was a time where people would go to a school for 4 years, 5 years. And so for me, it's actually Real Woods was, he went
that
through the kids club. Yeah. So Izzy Style.
Yep.
Another plug. You're welcome, Izzy. Awesome. So my boys went to his club and just like, that was the club in that part of the country. And the energy and all his assistants and all of them, they crank out some kids.
Yeah.
And Real was one of them. My son Micah was in the room at the same time as him a lot. That's how he would talk about it.
Yeah.
And like half the Michigan and Iowa rosters right now, Izzy. But that was where I got really interested. Was like, he's going to Stanford.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't been paying attention, and then I'd watch what you guys were building.
Yep.
And when they tried to pull the sport out.
Yep.
And were you there at that time?
No, we came in right after.
Right after, so it had been reinstated.
Yep.
Okay, what's the culture now? This is also parallel. A lot of businesses where someone comes in to do a turnaround, or they come into an organization that just had a brand thing or a PR thing or whatever. In some way, there's potentially trust lost, and there's potentially new opportunity.
For sure.
Kind of what culture did you walk into there?
I mean, no disrespect by this to the old coaching staff, and some of them I've built a great relationship with. I was brand new to coaching, and I didn't know those kids, so I called Ray Blake, who was the former head associate, and picked his brain constantly. And he was amazing to help, right? Didn't have to. I'd say complacency when we walked into it. It was, hey, you made it to Stanford. Great job.
Yeah.
And that was about it. I think most of those kids, that was the end goal.
Yeah.
Was getting to that point. And then they'd never really seen, I can't entirely say that because Stanford had a national champ, and then Shane Griffith was their second. Matt Gentry was their first, but the expectation of the entire team competing for team trophies and the whole team wrestling to get on the podium, win national titles, it just was not there.
Yeah.
Rob comes in, shakes things up. We start bringing in recruits that are ready to go right away. Puts heat on the older guys that they're not going to be able to just ride this out, and it was interesting. The shift took time for sure, culturally, from going to kind of complacency to, hey, we're expecting to win.
Yeah.
Like,
I love that. So your expectation of winning was higher than potentially the current team's was.
Big time. There was kids on the team that were there to win and be great in wrestling, but like the saying is, like, how you do one thing is how you do everything.
Yeah.
And it took some time to get them to shift into really believing. Up to us being at Stanford, I believe they'd never had a top 10 recruiting class. Mm-hmm. We got 3 top 5s our first 3 years there.
The other thing you said is essentially change the level of intensity.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how you're talking about you didn't have to push so much on the upperclassmen. Rather, your level of expectation was obvious, by who you recruited.
Yeah.
And this is one thing, it's so applicable in people building business organizations or churches or communities or whatever. What you value is evident by what you bring into the organization and what you don't accept.
Absolutely.
So how long did it take in the room there?
I'd say the second year you start to see a real shift. And what Rob did that, I commend him and have the utmost respect is he didn't come in with an iron fist. Mm-hmm. It wasn't his way or the highway. He did try to integrate with the current team as best as he could. And that's why we had minimal turnover and attrition, is that people loved him.
Well, I think what's interesting too is because, that's a very smart move, as you saw, because otherwise you're going to lose your best people.
Yep.
Your best existing people.
Yep.
And those aren't bad people.
Absolutely.
And when you can bring it up, and a lot of times they benefit probably from a different level of coaching or just different level of mindset. And I know sometimes we don't like that. I think most of my best coaches and mentors, high percentage of our interactions I was not in love with.
Yeah.
Looking back, I appreciated it. Right. Because you have that thing. And then as a dynamic, so you choosing who you worked for, you watching that play out, also knowing when your wagon is hitched here, that has implications.
Yep.
But what's interesting, and you coming here, Tarleton, you're now looking at the first D1 program, but you've seen what great looks like.
Yep.
And I think that's interesting in that you're not coming in wondering what a good program should look like.
Yeah.
How to recruit.
Right.
So knowing the picture of what the vision is it, how influenced is that by what you saw with Rob, either Stanford or Cornell or other people you respect? Like, how much of what you've seen are you taking in, and how much are you shaping to be your own vision?
Almost all of it. Even my own college career, Brian Smith was trying to start a program at Syracuse, had to raise a certain amount of money, then they rug pulled him. He ends up landing at University of Missouri. When he inherited that program, we weren't even the best wrestling team in the state. We were losing to Lindenwood. We were losing to Missouri State,
really,
who no longer has a team. We were losing to the Maryvilles. And it took, what he did that was so amazing is he created this identity, Tiger style, which I'm sure you've heard at this point.
Yeah.
And man, the culture change and just the belief we had as a team in Tiger style.
Yeah.
And seeing what he could do Missouri's not a crazy good academic school. There's nothing super special about Missouri.
Yeah, I spent my early years in Missouri. Let's talk about that. But
right?
Yeah.
Outside of the wrestling program now. And now kids are flocking there like crazy. They're having their best recruiting classes they've ever had. And then with Rob, same thing. He inherits Cornell, finds a way to make it work. With us, like my expectations the same. First coming to Tarleton, didn't know a ton about it. And then you learn some of the niches of Tarleton, like, hey, our in-state tuition is about as low as you're ever going to find for a Division I program. Wrestling is the second highest ranked sport for first-generation college students.
Really?
That's a golden opportunity to get kids. We only get 9.9 scholarships as a fully funded wrestling program. So not everybody's getting full rides. It's very rare to get anything above 30, 40% scholarship.
Right. Yep.
But because our cost of tuition is so low, we've gotten recruits this year that had scholarship offers to Division I programs, and it was still cheaper to come wrestle for us when we don't have scholarships yet.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So when you think about that competitive edge, being the only program in Texas, being the first Division I program in Texas, being a trailblazer, all these things, my expectation is to do the same thing they did, and I did. I got to witness some of it firsthand. I got to learn from some of the best that have ever done it. And I'm so thankful to be a part of that coaching tree and even now when there's things that I'm not quite sure about or need some guidance, they've both been so willing to lend a hand and give insight. So my expectation is, I got to praise Little Rock. And Neil, he's done an incredible job. They're 5 years in, and they're a top 20 team in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Yeah.
Right?
Crazy.
Unbelievable. I think we could do it in 3. You know, I think
Let
we've got
the record show.
yes. No, and
So 3. Okay, hold on. 3 from when you are officially doing school, or 3
I'm counting now.
So now we're down to 2.
Yep.
All right.
And I know that sounds
You know what? I think that's not inaccurate.
right. I mean, again,
All the cards have to count.
zero disrespect here, but Little Rock is not the most fabulous place, you know, and they're doing amazing things. I think Texas is, and Tarleton specifically, we're an hour and a half from Dallas, hour from Fort Worth, 2.5 hours from Austin, 3 hours from Houston. Location wise is
You have the magic location. I mean, this is one thing. I'd never heard of the school until I met you.
Yeah, that's funny.
And I saw this guy, his hair on fire at high school tournaments, handing out shirts.
Yeah.
And like purple shirt. And I'm like, that's not. My brother wrestled Northwestern. I'm like, nope. Yeah. But then we started talking, and you know, it's like as soon as you see each other, cauliflower ear,
right?
And we all walk funny, like I'm wrestling.
Yeah.
But
like this,
yeah. And you've got also, you know, I just tell people that in Texas, it's you know, you go anywhere in the world. And I've traveled a lot, you know, maybe 65 countries, whatever. Yeah. Everywhere you go in the world, where are you from? People will say, I'm from America.
Yeah.
I'm from the United States.
Yeah.
Unless they're from Texas.
Yeah.
Anywhere in the world, where are you from? Texas.
Yep.
You know, great. I mean, the Republic of Texas is alive and well.
Big time.
And that spirit of that also, families prefer for their kids to stay in state. Mm-hmm. Now, especially if they're from one of the schools that, you know, 3 generations in.
For sure.
But that pride here, and also, it's a big state, long ways to get across.
Yep.
And being in that hub probably helps. You mentioned also, though, the experience you've had at other schools, and but with kids. You came into the conversation, too, with a lot of data. I think you know the stats around what are your winning points, what are your selling points, you know. And I think that's you know, something that I don't see a lot in athletics, especially in collegiate athletics, is understanding the market, if you will.
Yeah. What
is the marketplace? What is the opportunity?
Right.
That comes from somewhere.
Rob.
Where is that? And that's from Rob's understanding of it.
He always preached, like, you have to focus on what you have. Mm-hmm. Whether it's selling to donors, mm-hmm. to get funds to get where you want to be, whether it's selling to recruits, you focus on what you've got and you find your selling points. And that was something we brought here. And now we've got 42 recruits in 4.5 months. They're all seniors. We're about to start our junior recruiting class. We were just very behind and had to really focus on seniors. But again, some of these guys were D1 guys. And yeah, just watching the way he did things and operated and how successful. I mean, while we were there, he raised an additional like $10 million in 2.5 years.
That's awesome. What is it that catches? You mentioned to me a donor commitment you just had recently. That's awesome. I mean, that's like with a program that doesn't exist yet. That's really great. I don't know if you can talk about it yet or not, but that is.
But I could allude to it.
Yeah, I would. I don't want to ask for that because I understand. Anytime you're in fundraising mode too, you got to deal with it. But what is it that catches the big donor, knowing that you still have to have the long tail? What is it that what you saw with Rob, or what you're seeing, that when you're trying to inspire somebody to buy into your vision, literally, buy into your vision versus just we believe in you?
Yeah.
What do you look for, and what are the key selling points?
I'd say the big thing is selling to them why we can be competitive and successful. You know, donors don't want to invest in a team that's not going to do well. So that's why a lot of those things I do know is because that's one of the first things out of my mouth when I do meet with these donors. The second thing is the brutal honesty. You know, Rob is super endearing in the sense that you know exactly what you're getting with him at all times. He doesn't pull punches. He is extremely blunt. That's why people also hate him, to be fair, but it works. And just, you know, I do lay it out. Hey, this is where we're at. Mm-hmm. This is where we're going to be. And this is why we're going to be there. Yeah. Do you want to be a part of this or not?
I love that.
And
there's something there. I mean, that's fundamental, like inspiration. Start with why.
Yeah.
Right. And then the brutal honesty, radical candor, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
that's something that I think trust is the fundamental thing in relationships and commitment,
Big time.
money or otherwise.
Yep.
With that kind of fundraising that he did, and again, it could be fundraising, recruiting, all of it has a similar thing, right?
Yeah.
There's a vision,
Yep.
and then there's a practicality, pragmatic plan to get there.
Yep.
Moderately believable, almost impossible. That's
Right.
about right. How much ongoing communication then? With a program like that, we're raising $10 million. You probably don't just like get the check and run away.
No,
How do you
definitely
maintain those relationships? You're still building the program. How do you balance these key stakeholders? It's going to be the university itself. It's going to be the politics involved with that.
Yep.
You have, supporters, you have fundraisers, you have parents. How do you balance those key stakeholders with the actual work to be done to build a program?
That's a good question. I'd say like for right now with the donors, especially, we're in the fundraising part. We're starting to see things come to fruition now that we're 4.5 months in. But you have to prioritize. And right now money's obviously a huge priority for us.
Yep.
My associate head coach, Jimmy Overheiser, we've divided and conquered. His main focus is recruiting.
Yep.
My main focus is fundraising and the administrative side. But it's checking in constantly. I do a bi-weekly newsletter every 2 weeks, giving updates to our donors or anybody that's signed up or wants to be involved.
That's impressive. So they know whether they're wherever they are in the marketing queue or if they've already written the check, so to speak, they feel very aware of what's going on.
Yep.
Good news, bad news.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, very blunt, very honest. Like the newsletter I'm sending out this week talks about how awful we competed at the conference. The 2 guys we brought, they went to school not planning on wrestling. One of them never even made it to the state tournament. The other one was playing football at University of Texas. Transferred into Tarleton, joined our wrestling team. Had pretty good seasons. At conference, worst I've seen him compete. And I talk about that. And I'm just very honest. Like, hey, I was out of the room most of the week fundraising. It showed. Our guys did not perform. They did make it to nationals, thankfully, so they'll get a chance at redemption this next weekend in Shreveport. But it's things like that. Again, the blunt honesty, trying to be funny a little bit, but constant updates with what we're doing, where their money's going, the work we're putting in. Because I want them to see, like, hey, I didn't get your money and run, and I got your money, and I am on to the next thing, and trying to continue to build this. Even once we get to $2 million, my fundraising is not going to stop. I want to build an RTC.
Just getting started.
Yeah, we're just getting started. And I think once people see what we can do when we do officially launch,
I tell you what,
it's going to come.
As someone who is very passionate about the sport of wrestling, what it can do for people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to get into that a little bit too, because the human component of that, if you look at Stanford or anywhere else, the number of people who benefit from that program, typically there are hundreds of people no one's ever heard of for the 5 stars. And all the ones who got injured along the way, the ones who, actually never wrestled varsity, the ones who they had blended success, call it, they benefit, right? And that rising tide lifts all ships is pretty impressive.
Absolutely.
And at a scale that isn't, if you look at when Penn State had, a bunch of problems with their football program, but Cale Sanderson, that team, the wrestling team, was championship caliber people at the school that gave them something to be proud of, the level of ethics and commitment, when other things were having problems. And you watch the compound effect of that.
That's such a great
attitude.
point. Yeah.
And I like the idea that it would be very easy to come in with a little bit smoke and mirrors where you are right now.
Yeah.
And kind of gloss over the fact that, small program, not much going on. Yeah. And also the guys wrestling, I'm sure they respect you being direct with them. Yeah. Nobody benefits from someone who doesn't believe in them. And they'll rise to a different level. It's fun to see. You need to be a better loser idea sounds good, but it's a really bad idea. Yeah. So I respect that. And I like when you mentioned it, again, the parallel that I see with call it tech startups or whatever, it's very similar. The ones who I know are going to be successful, they're communicating all the time. Yeah. It may be at scale, via email or something else. It's not a 9 to 5 mindset.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely not.
I know I get calls 11:30 midnight,
Yep.
and I know it's going to be from a founder. Like the entrepreneurs out there, the whoever, they don't look at the clock.
Right.
They know that you're not going to pick up if you're busy, and they'll say, "Hey, man, I just need. Can I talk to you about something?"
Yeah.
And they'll put that on you, or they'll be so excited they're like, "I shouldn't shout this from rooftops." Bye.
Yeah. That's great.
You know, but what you're saying, I think that again, trust is built by consistency over time.
Yeah.
And lost in a moment.
For sure.
Right. And I think that is where you gain the confidence of people.
Mm-hmm.
You alluded to something too that I can't let go for a minute. You mentioned that the idea in creating not just fundraising for this programming, I'm sure you'll have better and better facilities and people and all that. And then you mentioned RTC. So for those that are not familiar with wrestling, regional training centers are the next level of where our athletes then can prepare to be world level competitors.
Yeah. Yep.
The U.S. 30 years ago, wasn't very competitive at the world level. Mm-hmm. They then had a bunch of people come in that, there's way too many people to give credit to. But, Dave Schultz is one of them. And you look at the Shear brothers and you look at the Olivers and all those people early on, and we started pretty soon getting pretty competitive. Mm-hmm. And that development program that Ray Oliver put together, Olympic Training Center, a long time ago, and then we started getting these regional training centers, right? And the RTCs. As a Nebraska guy, I love that.
Yeah.
Kendall Cross, a good friend of mine, a great program up in New York. It does so much for our high-level athletes.
Oh, it's amazing.
And you take the Jordan Burroughs of the world in green, and they were in Nebraska, and then they go to Pennsylvania. And then you look at the South.
Right.
And we're sitting here with this big void and huge opportunity.
Yep.
So I like the fact that that's part of your vision.
Oh, big time. And it's not as expensive as it would seem, specifically the way we'll structure it. And again, can't say his name enough and thank him enough, but Rob Cole, what we did at Stanford, instead of pouring all this money into these athletes so that they could be training for Olympic teams, world teams, and also training our college wrestlers, instead of paying them cash, he got them internships.
Nice.
And job opportunities, and was getting them paid elsewhere.
Yeah.
But also another amazing thing that Rob did, but this is why I want to use our RTC structure very similarly.
Right. Wrestling is a nonverbal sport. We can get away with it.
It ends, it does end. And I think it's fantastic to have world and Olympic level dreams, but to also build your resume and prepare yourself for when it does end is a beautiful thing. I haven't seen other RTCs tap into, and I don't know if I should even say this out loud because it was something I hadn't seen till working with Rob, but it's brilliant.
I tell you, it's the community benefits. And this is, again, talent pools, what I would call a talent pool in any ecosystem, anywhere where someone can have an opportunity they would not have had before.
Yeah.
Because talent's relatively equally distributed, but opportunity is not.
Absolutely.
And whether that's somebody building inner city programs, I'm a big fan of Beat the Streets in the U.S. and a part of that in Chicago, and I have Beat the Streets Austin, we'll be talking about later today. That's one way to open opportunity. And another is what you're doing is create programs that didn't exist before, and you're building it at the Division I level, which will build better high school programs in the state, which means you'll have more and more, finally, junior high, middle school programs.
Yep.
Right? Kids clubs. The whole ecosystem wins. But then if you take it outside the sport, that's interesting you said that, because you take it outside the sport and the community wins. I'll give you an example of that. My son Micah started a franchise last year, home service franchise.
Yep.
So Heroes Lawn Care, crushing it. He was franchise of the year one, 23 years old.
That's amazing.
And he's like you and I, frustrated it's not going faster.
Yeah, right.
But you need a lot of labor. And so they don't do like mowing, so they do like landscaping, sprinklers, fertilizer and that. But the landscaping takes a lot of labor.
Yeah.
So as also a former wrestler and, national qualifier for Fargo and stuff, he tapped into the wrestling team. So with his brothers wrestling, like Travis, his labor was a bunch of the wrestlers.
That's great.
So think about where you need labor done.
Yep.
You need basically stuff carried, knuckle dragon wrestlers. They're all competitive.
Yeah.
They'll have a high standard. They'll work together. The kind of employee you get is dramatically different than the person who's slogging to work every day
Absolutely.
and just mail it in. So I can only imagine, especially if you're in the DFW area, people who ideally flocking to hire people like that.
Absolutely. And there's that Forbes article that talks about wrestlers being the best athletes you could hire, or best whatever you can hire.
I wish I had the data. We need a Jamie, like Rogan said, on the number of Fortune 500 CEOs that have a wrestling background.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. There's
It's
some of
up
those
there.
you don't realize.
Absolutely.
And it's the resilience of it comes through, and the humility as a sport where people who don't realize it, they maybe have only seen entertainment wrestling, they haven't seen like collegiate or
For sure.
and it's you and another person.
Yeah.
There's nothing to hide.
It's humiliating.
It
is.
The victory and defeat are quite high and quite low.
Yeah.
And that's probably why there's not as many egotists as it relates to celebration and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
It's pretty impressive. But also, you can't blame it on anyone, except that you can always blame it on the official.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, it's pretty great to see. And so there's more I want to do here, but also the character you built coming into this probably didn't start with wrestling. Like rewinding back to what kind of brought you into the sport. Like go back to what was the situation you were raised in? Like where was it? What were you, what were you doing with your life? And as a kid, what was it that attracted you to the sport?
Dumb luck, to be fair. I grew up in this tiny town called Plattsburgh. My graduating class was about 22 kids.
What state?
Missouri.
Plattsburgh, Missouri. Where's that in the
Missouri.
state? Where is that located?
It is 45 minutes northeast of Kansas City.
Oh,
so
this is crazy. First 7 years of my life lived in north central Missouri. Closest town was called Unionville.
Okay.
Centerville, Trenton. I don't know.
Yeah.
So same thing. We were nowhere in Missouri.
That's funny.
Closest town was 800 people.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's
interesting.
My graduating class again, a tiny school. In kindergarten, they passed out flyers to join the youth wrestling club. None of my family had ever wrestled before. Had no idea what it was. Assumed it was WWE. Was so excited about it. Brought it home. My dad said, absolutely not. You are not wrestling. We're a football, basketball family. My mom finally pressured him. Was like, no, you need to let him try it. He needs to experience all these sports. I go to my first wrestling practice, and the coach at the time was Ray Farwell. And at some point in the practice, I wish I could have my dad tell this story, but I've heard it enough times at this point. Ray Farwell approached my dad sometime in the middle of the practice and goes, how long have you been wrestling? My dad was like, this is our first time. And he grabs my dad. He goes, sir, you are going to be at this for a long time.
Oh, good for him. That's awesome.
And my dad took that so to heart. I was just whatever with wrestling at that point.
Was that authentic or was it a recruiting tactic?
I think it was off. I mean,
It had to be. I'm kidding.
Hit the nail on the head. I'm going to do this for life at this point. So there was times I tried quitting, but because of that conversation, my dad just would not let it go. And thank
Interesting
goodness
point.
he didn't.
So there's a time where it's been obvious to you, or it's been pointed out to you, that there's something bigger.
Yeah.
And so in the times when you were down, you had that thing to look back on.
Yeah. Well, my dad did.
Your dad did. Well,
I was too
but
young.
He was the leader in this scenario. Now,
Big
did
time.
you have siblings?
4, younger.
So you're the oldest.
Yep.
Brothers, sisters.
2 brothers, 2 sisters. Yep.
So did your brothers become wrestlers because you wrestled them?
Nope.
Did they avoid it?
I was yeah, like the plague.
Yeah, that's
they
interesting.
wanted no part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's being around the sport my whole life.
Yeah.
I've noticed that they're either in or out.
Yeah.
I have one brother, nothing to do with any sports.
Yeah.
And then the others, like you're all in. So
Yeah.
that's interesting. So, all right, now you're in kindergarten. You had youth program, Missouri, and you were in the Missouri part of Missouri, not the Missouri part of Missouri.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Missouri enough, close to the Missouri part.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, you just got to head back over that way. You ever get back there?
No, to be honest.
Yeah.
So as I kept wrestling, we eventually moved when I was in 5th grade to a better school, bigger school, with more opportunities. Started venturing out to competitive clubs like Tony Perler, if you've heard of Perler.
So you had a ways to go to Perler's Club.
Not,
Did you drive to it?
Actually, no, it was right down the road, funny
Oh.
enough.
From the town when you were...
There's 2 Perlers. There's one in St. Louis, one in Kansas City.
Okay. Got it.
So Tony was actually a national champ for Nebraska.
Okay, yeah, yep.
And then Nick, his brother, was an All-American. He has actually the bigger, better
Right.
program, but Tony was where I was going.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I was thinking you were going to like 4 hours away.
So that did happen. I end up meeting this guy, Mike Ironman, when I'm in 5th grade, and he changed the whole course of my wrestling career. I was okay at this point, partially because I got armpit hair before everybody else. So I was having some success, but never winning state, never winning the big tournaments.
Were you winning on natural talent and strength, or were you winning on technique? Yeah.
No, strength.
Yeah.
Big time. Meet this guy, Mike Ironman, at a tournament in Colorado. He's like, hey, come to my camp. I live in Columbia. It was a 2.5-hour drive. Went to his camp, and the whole approach that he had to the sport was mental and enjoying it. Wrestling, as hard as it is, I don't need to make it worse. I need to make you enjoy it. I want you to develop. I want you to love the sport. And sometimes we would have an hour and a half practice, and 45 minutes of it was talking and listening to him tell stories. And it was amazing. Changed my perspective of the entire sport. Went to that camp, and for the next 2 years, God bless my dad, 3 days a week would drive me to Columbia, hour and a half practice, drive me back. And I end up winning state the next year, win Tulsa the next year, win state again.
Explain to people what Tulsa is.
Tulsa is the world championship of youth wrestling.
Yep.
And so I went from being a very okay wrestler to year to 2 years with this guy, and I'm winning the biggest tournaments.
That's it. Yeah, the numbers wise, that'd be like 100x improvement, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just statistically.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And that commitment.
He's special.
Yeah.
We had a garage of about 20 kids in the backyard of his house. Out of that garage, myself, Jaden Cox, world champ or
Awesome.
world medalist, Jaden Ironman,
Yep.
who initially was Jaden Clayton. Mike ended up adopting him. 4-time All-American, national finalist.
Great story too, by the way.
Brock Mahler, 4-time All-American. Jarrett J. Hughes, 4-time national qualifier, blood round. And that was out of 20 kids.
That's amazing.
In the middle of nowhere, in this guy's garage.
So walk me through that, because a lot of times people say, well, I'm not in the epicenter of my industry or my sport or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
They feel that, well, if I'm in tech, I need to be in Silicon Valley. If I'm in finance, I have to be in London or New York or Hong Kong. Right. And in athletics, sometimes I grew up in this area where there just weren't that many great,
Yep.
A couple of things you said there is you got people together who probably, but they weren't at that level when you got together, right? You weren't at that.
No, definitely not.
Peak level. You had a coach with the right discipline. I bet those kids, I know Jaden, my son's went to a couple of his camps.
Ironman?
Jaden Cox.
Cox. Okay.
And I mean, what a great personality. Talk about learning to love the sport and make it fun.
Yeah.
At least from a persona standpoint, it's really neat. Now, wrestling used to be somber, sullen, weight cutting face,
Crazy.
sunken eyes.
Yeah.
And it really fundamentally changed. But that group, was everyone, that group of guys, what was it that made that special? Was it just the coach, or was there something else that really compounded the progress?
I got to give Mike a ton of that credit. Obviously we had parents that made sacrifices, and you can never talk about that enough, but Mike's approach was just so special and so different and refreshing that it was about wrestling and loving it rather than winning and finding results. He told us, like, Go lose. I want to see you lose.
Yeah.
Because that's how we learn. That's how we grow. So he was relieving you of that pressure of the result. So then you only have to focus on getting better at wrestling, loving the sport.
Was he the first one, like my recollection, I've heard other people talk about his mentality because, it's a compounding effect of people that work with people who work with people.
Yeah.
You fast forward today and you see guys like Gail Sanderson, that the whole philosophy.
Yeah.
Let's go have some fun, let's figure it out. It's not all about winning. Turns out they win a lot.
Yeah. Right.
And, I think it's true in almost everything people do is if they get very intense on the result, you often aren't as happy.
When you skip the steps it takes to get there. If you're hyper focused on the result, which is something sometimes you just can't control, it's stressful and anxious and all these things. And I'm using the same coaching philosophy now, but what gets you to those results? It's just like when you set long-term goals, you have to break it into attainable short-term goals to eventually see yourself there. Same with wrestling. What gets you the results you're looking for? It's good position, loving the sport, wrestling hard, effort. When you're focused on those things, those are things you can control, makes it so much more manageable. And like anything in life, it's 90% mental.
For sure. When you see people who are focused on improvement and getting better and enjoying it and loving it, they tend to, there's a balance because they win a lot. But watching that and watching people develop like that, I think it's really fascinating too. And in every arena, you'll see that, where you'll see people who are, happiness, I think, really comes from progress. If you're making achievement, you're making progress, you become more happy.
Big time.
And, the thing, there was a story, I was just, Tom Brands. There's a story of him winning the Olympics, 1996. He wins the Olympic gold medal in Atlanta, and Olympics have pretty fantastic medal ceremonies.
Yeah.
He comes off, showers, does his thing, asks for his medal, rented a car. He and his wife drove back to Iowa City. He skipped the whole medal ceremony. He drove all night and came home and mowed his lawn. And they said, "Why did you skip the medal ceremony and mow your lawn?" He said, "It was the next thing on my to-do list."
That's so great.
He was just so wired of progress. It's like, ceremony, great. He already won the Olympics.
Yeah.
And, that's a brand. I mean,
Absolutely.
for sure. But that mindset too of, I think, people that are having fun, you can tell.
Yeah.
You can tell when they're having fun. And I think it was Jordan Burroughs. Somebody recently, who was pretty high profile, someone was asking about their kids in the sport, and it's probably true of any sport, but they basically said, just make sure they're having fun.
Yeah.
And the thing that they remember, when they're a little kid and they're with their dad or their mom afterwards, they probably remember going to have ice cream after the tournament.
Right.
Those road trips, and
big time.
It's a commitment, but it's also worthwhile. I think a lot of the success principles my kids probably learned were from like audios, like today's version of podcasts, like CDs or whatever.
Yeah.
Because when we were going to Izzy, we'd had 3 kids. We had high school, middle school, grade school. It was an hour each way. We'd have 3 kids, and sometimes there was 6 hours a day of driving.
Yeah.
That my wife mostly did, but that car time with a kid, the time of commitment, is also good for both parties. So sometimes
absolutely.
parents are like, well, it takes so much effort to do this or that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what you build experiences,
Absolutely.
memories.
Yep.
And the same thing in the room. How much of wrestling practice is joyful?
Yeah.
Not 100%, right?
Absolutely.
So, all right, let's go to something about the achievement too. There's a guy, one of my first mentors, and I first started seeing business success outside of the wrestling room. I finally saw people who are actually committed.
Yeah.
Because athletes have a tough time transitioning to the corporate world because it feels fake and shallow.
Yep.
And I think the reason it feels fake and shallow is because it's fake and shallow. And people talking about team work and all that, like, yeah, whatever. You're sitting around in a conference room drinking coffee.
Yeah.
It's not like the kind of intensity. But first thing I saw a guy, and it was an entrepreneurial conference, and people who had hit this high level. The plaque they got says, "Man's greatest reward for his dedication to excellence is not what he gets for it, but who he becomes through it." And I think that character part, that who you become through it,
big time,
is where the camaraderie comes.
Yeah.
Those 20 guys in a garage. Certainly the medals and the podiums are great. But I would imagine most of your time when you talk about that era, it's probably more about the garage type of experience than it is about that one specific thing.
Oh, so much. Yeah, big time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you see kids who just have like awesome facilities and all the things, and they're whining about, do I have to go today?
Right.
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 So, so take me through that. This, you now you're like rising star, you're best in the country. Relatively early.
Yep.
Then what?
Then going into high school, crazy story. So that Plattsburgh club, tiny club where I first started out, there was a guy on that team at the time, was a 7th grader and was like the superstar. His name's Kenzie McLean. Hometown hero in every aspect of the word. Very successful in wrestling. Goes on to win multiple high school state titles. My freshman year at Kearney High School, he joined the coaching staff. And I recognized him immediately. It was like, oh my goodness. Like, no way. And I asked him about it, and he didn't really remember me, of course, but he remembered being in Plattsburgh, of course. And man, the next pivotal piece of my wrestling career. Going into high school, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do quite yet. I was still playing football. Didn't want to give up the NFL dream, but I'd been 5'5" since 5th grade, and unfortunately didn't see myself growing anymore. And had a pretty good freshman year. Made state finals, and I lost to the number 4 ranked guy in the country, Cody Brewer. He ended up being the whole story is I cut down a weight class to go his weight.
To wrestle him?
Yes. Because
that's gutsy.
he was going for his 4th title as a senior.
You wanted to knock him off.
And I was a freshman.
Yeah.
And so it was, one of us is getting 4. I'm going after him.
That's awesome. Okay, so you're a freshman. You could have gone up a weight class. Easier path. You took the hardest possible path.
I majored the state champ a weight class up.
But you took the harder path.
I did. And I'm so pumped I did.
Good for you.
It was so worth it. I got smoked in the finals.
Yeah.
I'd wrestled them earlier in the year, and it was 9-6. So I was like, hey, I can do this. Like, I'm going to get this guy. He ends up beating me, what was it, 7-3 in the state finals. So kind of put it on me. Yeah. But after that season, Kenzie, my Plattsburgh coach, sat down with me, and it was the best piece of advice to that point that I'd ever gotten. And it was, hey, you're really good. You're talented. But you do not have the passion. You need to cultivate your passion for this sport to get where you want to be and can be. And I didn't really understand it for a little bit. It did take time to develop, but man, once I did get to that point where all I could think about was wrestling and training and getting better and all these things, I never looked back, and it was so pivotal.
Most people listening to this would think that's crazy. You are, sort of junior high school, national level, national champion. You come in your freshman year, you're going to knock off the guy who's going for 4-time.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I really relate to. My first time in the finals was my first time at state. The year prior, I got knocked out in the blood round. I watched this guy come in and do what you wanted. He knocked off. There's a guy, undefeated 4-time state champ. He was going for his very last match. His name was Jason Dethloff, and he got knocked off by Jeremy Eckley. Oh, no. It was the whole stage watching this guy who won.
Went and chased him down.
And I am up in the nosebleeds, ticked off to be a spectator.
Yeah.
Watching the Parade of Champions and all that. And I watched the big match, biggest match of several years. The next year, I'm in the finals against that guy.
The guy that
kicked my butt.
The guy that knocked him off.
Jeremy Eckley. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, but like that.
Like, I'm going to do it back.
I related to. I was.
That's great.
And I didn't. But I love that. Okay, so but where I'm going is you national level competitor, national champion. You went for that gutsy move. Most people would say from the outside looking in, how could you possibly have needed more passion for the sport?
Yeah.
So the outside, your results were probably different than your internal.
For sure.
Communication.
Yeah.
How did he see that?
I mean, to be honest with you, the fact that I was still playing football, I wasn't wrestling in the off season yet.
Mm-hmm.
I even did track that year.
Mm-hmm.
So played football, wrestled, and then went straight into track. And then that summer sat me down and was like, hey, like,
Yep.
you're not passionate enough about this. Like, you're good at it, and I get it. And that's probably why you somewhat enjoy it, which was super true. I didn't quite love the sport the way I needed to get to that next level. And that was my first summer I ever did freestyle.
Yeah.
So, man, I can't speak enough on how pivotal that was and would be later down the line.
Yep.
Especially in my college career.
It's very interesting that the phases where first you get introduced to the sport.
Yeah.
Someone identifies you as with potential, and that's the thin thread.
Yep.
And you have your support system, in this case, your father, who bought that.
Yep.
And then you end up having different phases where the level of coaching is better, the level of commitment better, the level of training better.
Yep.
And you're finding mentors, teachers, coaches,
Yep.
scrapping it out along the way. You find a different environment. You find someone who you respect a lot who's a coach. You then get to a level you thought you were at a pretty good level. And the things people don't see during the wrestling season, you're probably totally committed.
Yeah, absolutely.
And but the other 9 months, again, multi-sport athlete versus single today. Yeah. So that's really interesting. And then you went, okay, so now you fast forward and the flywheel's going. And a lot of these things, I think, to me, seem like they're preparing you for what you're doing right now.
Big time.
Like as a leader, you have to be able to identify and relate to that individual who is that needs to be validated or needs to be, the way I would put it, there's just a few inches difference between a pat on the back and a kick in the butt. Yeah. Knowing when to do which.
Yep.
And you've had people do both.
Absolutely.
So you then move into your collegiate career. So you have a good high school career. How'd you end up in high school overall?
I ended up 4-time state finalist, 3-time state champ, 2-time Super 32 finalist, 1-time Super 32 champ, 2-time Fargo All-American, 1-time Fargo champ. Graduated.
That's awesome. Fargo, and for people who don't know, Fargo is then at the next level. That's the world level wrestling. So freestyle and folk style are different. So for people who don't know the sports, if you watch the Olympics, that's the styles that go to Fargo for nationals.
Yep.
And the Super 32 folk style, right? Yeah. So both, you're national champ at both. Yep. Scrapping through pretty good. Well, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
The percentage of people in the sport that have a stop sign is small. And it's almost overwhelming to the kids who see somebody who's been able to do that. Yeah. And then until you get in a room where a bunch of other guys did, right?
I had a pretty cool bracket too. Bo Nickel, Miles Martin.
Okay. So you had Bo Nickel in your bracket.
Yep.
Texas.
Yep.
Yeah. So Alan, that's impressive. Did you guys meet in the bracket or not?
No, I actually didn't hit him. The way they used to do it was that weird,
it wasn't a full bracket
system.
Yeah.
And he had taken his second loss before I hit him. I did wrestle Miles Martin. I'm trying to think who else was in that bracket. There was some names.
That tournament, I think it's the biggest wrestling tournament. I know, 1,000 kids weighing in.
So
it's
big.
incredible. And Fargo's like not where you would expect to have it. So that's impressive. And now I imagine you probably had your choice of where to go to college, or what was out of that decision?
Yeah. So after I won Super 32s as a junior, I got my list down to pretty much 3 schools, and it was Cornell, UVA, or Duke.
Your academics must have been pretty good.
Yeah. My family's not wealthy by any means, so I knew I had to do both to make sure I could go to the next level.
I can relate to that, or else you got to make a lot of money yourself. Yeah.
And you don't get a ton of money in wrestling as it is. So I ended up going to Duke. My desire to go there came from one of the assistant coaches that was there, 4-time blood round. Texas boy, actually, funny enough. I should have seen these signs coming.
Yeah, you should have. All roads lead to Texas.
His name's Will Rowe, wrestled for University of Oklahoma, literally made blood round 4 times.
Wow.
He's considered one of the best to not All-American.
Wow. Blood round, for people that don't know, is the final match in tournament, a whole bunch of things. if you win that match, you medal.
Yep.
If you lose that match, you don't.
You go home.
And
it's the most heartbreaking. Yeah. And so his passion for the sport was through the roof.
mm-hmm.
You know, he didn't quite get there, but I'll be danged, he's going to get somebody there.
Yeah.
And such an incredible guy. Incredible, like, was on me before the other schools, broke rules to get me there. Like, was a guy, I was like, this guy's going to fight for me. And at the time, I think even to this day, I'm the highest ranked recruit Duke's ever had.
Really? Yeah.
Yes. They are not very good.
Yeah.
And me being the dumb high school 18-year-old kid that I was, overconfident in everything, thought I could go change the program. Got out there and unfortunately had a couple deaths in my family and just some tough things happened, and decided it was best for me to go back home, which I know so many people would kick me in the head for giving up a Duke degree, but decided to go home and transferred to the University of Missouri, and that's where I finished out my career.
Well, I think, first of all, other people's assessments of your decisions are moderately interesting at best.
Yeah.
However, it also says a lot about your priorities.
Yeah.
And, we're not going to wrestle forever. It's interesting you mentioned something, too. You alluded to, no disrespect to Duke at all, but the environment we choose to go into is a big part of who we become.
Absolutely.
That ecosystem, like, imagine, had you gone into a room that had this pull, that had this magnetism in it, that your experience probably would have been better, different, whatever, like what you've created there. Yeah. And I'm translating this to you as a coach, the way in which you're thinking about it, because I know that you've felt that being the best guy in the room.
Yeah.
And often, in business, I always say, if I'm the smartest guy in the room, I'm in the wrong room.
Right. Absolutely.
And that's pretty, you saw that.
Yeah.
And so that, I think we're going to wind down on time, and I think I could talk to you for 3 hours. Like, this is, and especially if we're talking into actual wrestling.
Yeah.
I wanted to go down the path of a bunch of that, and I'm like, nobody's going to relate to that. But I wanted to pull out some of these parallels that are so unique to wrestling, we think.
Yeah.
But their life.
Absolutely.
Gravity kind of applies everywhere. And those principles that you use also are so personal in the sport, where it's one-on-one, where it's a combat sport.
Yeah.
Combat sport is very directly telling of cause and effect.
Yeah. Absolutely.
If I do this, not good.
Yeah.
But I watched something too that the level you were, a lot of times people who are great at doing a thing as an individual don't necessarily make great managers or leaders. Various reasons, but those are two different skills.
Yeah.
Doing and teaching. And a lot of times people who are exceptional lose patience.
Yeah.
Don't understand why someone can't get it.
Right.
I think the person who fascinates me the most is probably Kale.
Absolutely.
He never lost, and he's able to coach people through loss and through pain and through those things that he didn't personally go through necessarily himself. Right. Unbelievable. But, similarly, you're building a program from the ground up. You're not going to initially be doing a ton of recruiting of grants. You're going to be recruiting people who have the potential, who have passion, have drive. I've seen you recruiting the high school kids at these tournaments, and you eventually are probably going to do a lot of recruiting from other states.
Absolutely.
But right now, the vision that you're showing, you're painting the dream, you're out there active, like sleeves rolled up, as the Brits would say, get on the coal face, where you're like, you're working.
Absolutely.
And you're hustling and you're working. You're probably doing two tournaments, and you got to sell the parents and you got to sell the kids without acting like you're selling, and that whole thing.
Yeah.
Now that's impressive to me, that you can take yourself from being the best in the country in multiple aspects of the sport into building a program where you're going to have kids at all level of talent, commitment. Well, you probably won't put up with low commitment, but I've watched that. The two kids that I know personally that are going into your program, that they were so excited to be able to say, it's just starting, it's new.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times people don't like to join something new that's unproven and doesn't have a brand name or whatever.
It's scary. Yeah.
But there's other people who are just built for that. And they're like, part of your pitch has to be, because I've heard it repeated from others, we're going to build something great.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
We're going to be a part of something where we're going to look back and remember when there was like just a few of us?
Yeah.
And that's third party already come through. So hat tip on putting that passion in. It's your commitment is evident. And I think it's a good example for people out there who are building businesses, raising money, doing the things that they need to do. The ability to go from highest level of individual performance to recognizing that you're building something greater than yourself, and the ability to relate to other people. How does that happen? It's not normal that someone can really do that, sort of fly at 37,000 feet and walk at the ground level.
That's a really great question, to be honest. I think just, again, the humility that wrestling teaches you, and understanding that we do have this ultimate goal, but it is going to take steps. And I've got to, create that culture now, get these kids bought in no matter what level they're at. They will impact our culture moving forward. And I've never responded well to the authoritarian type leadership and coaching. And so, again, wrestling is so hard as it is. Being able to develop and work with these kids is also a chance for me to prove myself as a coach. And so it's kind of another challenge within itself. Like, yeah, we don't have the biggest named recruits. We don't have the best kids in the country. But I bet we still have some results.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not expecting these guys to, get us a top 10 team finish immediately.
It's going to take 2 more years, you said.
Yes, but I do think I can develop guys. I do think I could get them to believe in me and believe in Jimmy and believe in our system and believe in themselves and perform at a high level. And a lot of that comes from, I do study Kale. And whatever he's doing is working. I was lucky to work shoulder to shoulder with Vincenzo Joseph, and you can guarantee I was picking his brain about what they were doing in that room and how they operated and the things that he was saying. It works. I don't need to change it.
Interesting. So the principles are obvious. No need to mess with that.
Absolutely not.
And then what about, we don't learn a lot from winning.
No.
Like we learn from losing, from failure, from pains. How is that? How have the pains and disappointments of your career, if you ever had any, probably didn't.
No, my whole
everything was perfect. Yeah. So
awful.
What happened? What was that experience? Just kind of briefly, what was that experience, and how does that translate into this current experience?
I'll run through it as quick as I can. So coming out of high school, I'm a top 22 pound for pound recruit, ranked 3rd at my weight class specifically. I'd beaten several 2B college national champs. Freshman year at Duke, have a knee surgery, take my redshirt year, transfer home. First year at University of Missouri, I ruptured a disc in my neck, had to have a disc replacement surgery, and was out for 9 months, missed the whole season. So at that point, it had been 2 years since I'd actually competed. Right as I was coming back from my neck surgery, I blow out my knee. I had to have a knee reconstruction. I'm out 9 more months off the mat, just watching practice, showing up. Finally, going into my senior year of college, I'm a redshirt junior technically at that time. I get my first healthy season. But at this point, it had been 3 years.
You're off the mat 3 years.
Hadn't competed in 3 years. Wow. First match, I have a kid that's ranked 17th in the country. His name's Eric Baroni. We're dueling Illinois in our softball stadium, which was a pretty cool event. It was outside. I'm walking onto the mat to wrestle. My coach grabs me. He goes, "Hey, I just want you to know you're going to get really, really tired, and that's okay." I was like, "What the hell?" Thanks. Son of a gun, second period hit, and I was like, "Oh, he said this would be okay." All right. End up winning that match and kind of didn't look back. I ended up going.
This is what non-wrestlers don't understand.
Yeah.
College match is 7 minutes. 7 minutes. Yeah. It's like 3 years.
It's exhausting.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. The anxiety, the pressure, the physicality of the sport. It's exhausting. A couple weeks later, I take 2 losses and was on the verge of losing my starting spot. Got one more chance. They took me to wrestle Virginia Tech. I was wrestling the number 4 guy in the country who was a 2-time All-American at this point. and I beat him 9-2, and then just never looked back. Ended up going undefeated the rest of the season. Going into nationals, was ranked 3rd in the country. I ended up blowing my quarterfinals match with 15 seconds left.
Oh,
so that was a heartbreaker.
Yeah.
I had to wrestle the blood round, ended up pulling that out and finished 6th. So got All-American status. Because I did so well, my coach wanted me to apply for medical red shirts. I ended up getting 2. So
now you had 2 more years of eligibility?
3.
3 more.
So what would have been my redshirt junior year became my freshman year. So I had 3 years left, and I never wrestled again.
Why?
The next season was ranked 2nd in the country, was undefeated. I say never wrestled again. I mean at nationals. Was undefeated, and
okay, got it. Yeah.
fully tore my labrum, partial tore my rotator cuff, was out for the season. The next year was COVID. And then the next year I ruptured a 2nd disc in my neck and had to have another emergency neck surgery. And that was that.
How long did it take you to get through the fact that your life isn't over?
I'm still working on it.
That's real.
Yeah. That's why I catch myself sometimes telling stories about my own wrestling career, which isn't helpful to anybody.
I would say I like that honest energy, though, of there's still, so if you build a national championship program,
Yeah.
does that help?
No.
So that part is, your individual part's done.
Yeah.
So what about that energy you'd bring into as a coach? What has to happen now?
The biggest thing is stripping their identity in wrestling, because mine was so, again, I cultivated that passion, but I took it to a place that it shouldn't have been. And it was why I kept coming back. People ask me all the time, why'd you keep coming back? Like, how did you manage to stay in it? And the answer was easy as, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Like, of course I was coming back. It wasn't over. I'm going to find a way.
I get, you should meet my brother, Brian. You guys have such a similar story, right? He was my next older brother. He was actually a much better wrestler than I was technically. But same thing, that mindset and that identity and what it is and who it is. And he cranked, he was so intense and so focused. Because it's a part of who you are. But I think one of the things that I will say is that while that feels like your whole identity, and it seems like it is.
Oh, it does. Yeah.
The ability of what you're doing now, and I think because your business mindset, of being able to transfer that entrepreneur mindset into beyond the wrestling mat, is, you may not see it now, but I understand significant disappointment in individuals, things where.
Oh, it's a beautiful thing.
It was like, when you're at that point where like you're undefeated and everything's good, and you hit that heartbreaking moment where things fall apart, life's never going to be the same.
Yeah.
And sometimes people, I have someone I'm very close to who's 86 years old who's never got over some of the hardest stuff in their life. And that being said, if you can take that same energy and passion, you may or may not see it right now, but that what you have is probably one of the reasons why you have such magnetism for what you're doing right now. Is if you felt like you were the man, you may not be who you are right now. And it also translates to other things. So I think it's interesting that still, I have more to do. Is something that I think a lot of successful people have. There's something inside of them that won't quit, but I have a song to sing.
Yeah, absolutely.
A bell to ring, whatever you want to say. And there's that day to come. And it's not, I hope it's not insecurity. I hope it's not the idea that I'm not of value.
Absolutely.
But it's, the capability, what it's like to be the best in the country.
Yeah.
Multiple times. You know what it's like to be able to help others to improve.
Mm-hmm.
You've worked with some great athletes.
Mm-hmm.
And, the idea of your limitations are not your limit.
Right. Absolutely.
Because you can scale.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Absolutely.
And so I love seeing what you're doing, the passion you have, that smoke of battle on you is just great. But also in the character, I think the idea to be able to be a stand-up guy where you got to make commitments to people.
Yeah.
They're trusting you. And I don't see you having a problem with that, because that you're going to treat it right, give it what they got. and you're building an environment that people can become champions if they choose to. And and champions in life.
Absolutely.
Right?
That's the main goal, right? And
Yeah.
again, with the identity thing, I was a wrestler. Like, that was my whole identity, and it's not healthy.
It's not healthy.
It's what we do. It's not who we are.
I always make fun of people who do that with their jobs, but I did the same thing now. You sit by somebody on a plane and say, "Tell me about yourself." And they say, "I'm an accountant." Often that isn't a complete example of who they are. Right. It's like, well, but yeah, that's something. If you ever meet somebody and you don't know what they're talking about, and they talk to you the entire time, they corner you at a party, and all they tell you about is their actuarial, whatever. Yeah, it's just, it puts you in a coma. And I think the ability to do that, and I think also the idea of being able to serve others. The thing about coaching, when you're giving, you're happy.
Big time.
When misery starts by internalizing. But I would appreciate how can people follow what you're doing, Tarleton? How do they pay attention? You're just getting started here, so people that are listening that either want to support or people just want to follow the program, how do they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. The best way is going to our website, tsuwrestling.org. It's got any event we're going to be hosting. The comedy show May 4th with Greg Warren's on there. Eventually our golf outing is going to be anything.
Hit that one again. May 4th.
Yeah.
Greg Warren.
Yep.
In Dallas?
Fort Worth.
In Fort Worth.
Ridgely Theater. Yep.
That dude's hilarious. I just discovered him last year. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
So former Mizzou All-American.
Former Mizzou,
amazing guy.
Yeah, of course. There we go. There's the connection.
Doing it completely free.
Good for him.
Just for Texas wrestling. He coached in Houston for a while. We've got our recruiting links for both men and women on the website. Yep. If you want to sign up for our newsletter and be kept up to date with some of the more detailed things about our program, you can sign up for our newsletter there. And then my social media, which is gbaby_149 on Twitter, Instagram.
149 represents a weight.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, this is anybody listening to this needs to support the general idea of getting Division I wrestling in the state of Texas. Even if they're not familiar with the sport, what it can do for people, what it can do for the state, I think it's fantastic, and it gives kids a lot of opportunities, especially kids who are all different sizes, all different skill sets. Unlike for you and I are unlikely to be NBA All-Stars. It's possible. It's unlikely. But a lot of character, a lot of things it does for us. So I appreciate your willingness to invest. You're going to have to invest multiple year period of time, ups and downs.
Yep.
And you already know you're going to be successful. So I do too.
I think so.
I know. So.
I got a great team of people behind us, so I am pretty confident in it for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's in your hands.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Likewise. Thank you.